that's probably better. Whoops, like that. No, that's fine. Okay. Well, hello, Facebook. Wow. All right. Well, praise the Lord. Welcome to New Hope Church. We're glad you're here. Now, have you ever found that when you're in a hurry, things just go wrong? I mean, more so than normal. I mean, I know for myself, I find that if I'm in a hurry, I tend to make more mistakes than when I'm just, on time. Anytime I'm running late, I mean, if I have to print something on the printer, that's the day that my printer decides to run out of ink. Or, it seems like everything. It's like, little things. Your sleeve catches on a drawer, or you spill coffee and you have to go change, so now you're even later. It seems like every time when you're running late, you try to hurry and it just makes it worse. You go to tie your shoes and your shoelace breaks. It's like, it only happens when you're running late, it seems, at least for me. Years ago, someone came up with a law about this, and we're going to get to that. So today's message is called slowing down. It's a spiritual discipline of slowing things down, and that's what we're going to talk about. But this law is called Murphy's Law. You ever hear of Murphy's Law? Basically, anything that can go wrong will. That's Murphy's Law. When I slow down, I tend to pay more attention, and things just seem to go smoother. Have you experienced that? Is that true for you as well? It seems the busier I am, especially if I'm running late and I'm trying to hurry, it just makes it worse every time. I make a lot more mistakes, and I have to do the same thing over and over because I keep making mistakes. And I remember back years ago, I had a commercial business doing commercial maintenance. So basically plumbing, electrical, and carpentry. And there was an old saying, I don't know if they still use this today, but they used to say, measure once and cut twice, or measure twice and cut once. When the more rushing and more of a hurry you're in, the more times you're going to make a mistake. If you take your time, generally you're actually going to save time because you're not having to repeat yourself. So we've been going through a 4-week series. This series is called The Patterns of Jesus. And we've looked at several spiritual disciplines over the last 4 weeks. We looked at, the first week we looked at solitude and fasting. Then we looked at taking a Sabbath rest. We looked at simplicity last week. And today's topic is the spiritual discipline of slowing down, or patience, having patience. If I had to give this sermon in one sentence, I think I would probably say something like, Jesus took the time to walk 7 miles with his disciples and explain the gospel to them. 7 miles. We're going to be talking about that today. Our passage is found in Luke 24, verses 13 through 27. You can turn there, or I've got it on the screen here. In fact, I'll read that with you. It says that very day, 2 of them were going to a village named Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem. And they were talking with each other about all these things that had happened. While they were talking and discussing together, Jesus himself drew near and went with them. But their eyes were kept from recognizing him, and he said to them, "What is this conversation that you are holding with each other as you walk?" And they stood still, looking sad. What is that? He asked them this question, and it says, and they stood still. So they weren't walking fast. They weren't like speed walking. If you ever walk with people, they're trying to have a conversation, they're practically running. It's hard to keep up and talk at the same time. They stopped. They stood still, looking sad. And then it says, then one of them, named Cleopas, answered him, "Are you the only visitor to Jerusalem who does not know the things that have happened there in these days?" And he said to them, "What things?" And they said to him, "Concerning Jesus of Nazareth, a man who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word before God and all the people, and how our chief priests and rulers delivered him up to be condemned to death and crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel. Yes, and besides all this, it is now the 3rd day since these things happened. Moreover, some women of our company amazed us. They were at the tomb early in the morning, and when they did not find his body, they came back saying that they had had even seen a vision of angels who said that he was alive. Some of those who were with us went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but him they did not see. And he said to them, O foolish ones, and slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Was it not necessary that the Christ should suffer these things and enter into his glory? And beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted to them in all the scriptures the things concerning himself. So they drew near to the village which they were going. He acted as if he were going to go farther, but they urged him strongly, saying, Stay with us, for it is toward evening, and the day is now far spent. So he went in to stay with them. When he was at table with them, he took the bread and blessed and broke it and gave it to them. And their eyes were open, and they recognized him, and he vanished from their sight. Pretty amazing. So I want to set the stage for you. So these two disciples of Jesus were on the road to Emmaus. At this point, Jesus had been crucified. He'd been betrayed by one of his disciples, one of the 12 disciples. And he was crucified and had been buried in the tomb. The 11 remaining disciples were afraid. They were hiding out. So one of the disciples, Judas, went and hung himself. He committed suicide. The other 11 were hiding. They were thinking that the Romans were going to come find them next. They thought, they just crucified our master, our teacher, so we're next. So they were literally hiding from these Romans. They expected any time they're going to hear pounding on the door, let us in! We're coming to arrest you. Well, they went through the weekend. Jesus was crucified on Friday. Come Sunday, some of the women, the followers of Jesus, went to the tomb. They had planned to anoint his body and had brought a bunch of spices and wanted to make sure he was well taken care of. They got to the tomb. What did they find? The stone was rolled away and the tomb was empty. That's right. He wasn't there. And they saw angels. And the angels told him, he's not here, he's risen. And then Jesus appeared to Mary and said, I'm here, this is me. Well, the disciples didn't know what to think about this. They thought, what is going on? And of course we know that Peter and John ran to the tomb, and sure enough, it was empty. But they thought that this idea that Jesus was risen, this was impossible. This couldn't have happened. This had never happened before. And they were sad because of the death of their master, Jesus. And then they were confused by this nonsense that these women were saying, that he was risen and that they had seen angels and they saw Jesus and they went and they didn't see him. They knew that Jesus had been crucified and he was laid in a borrowed tomb. And they knew that people don't just raise themselves from the dead. That doesn't happen. Now keep in mind that in that day, the testimony of women was not considered something valid. Matter of fact, a woman couldn't testify in court because they weren't trusted. The Jews actually looked at women as the cause of the fall of mankind. They believed it was all Eve's fault. Well, guys, if you go back and read it, it says that Adam was with her when she ate the fruit. So we can't say it was all Eve's fault. But for the Jews, they thought it was their fault. They thought these women, all women were just temptresses, and they were there to tempt man to fall back into sin. So for that reason and others, women were often seen as just like second-class people. They weren't looked at as being authoritative. If a woman came and said this happened, the man would have to go verify for himself. He wouldn't believe a woman necessarily that it actually happened. So when these women came proclaiming Jesus was risen, they weren't trusted right away. Today we would think, if Jesus were here today and we were following him and the women came and said, hey, he's risen, well, we believe it. But for these Jews, it's like, no, come on. What are you pulling on us? So they had to go check it out. Now, let's get back to these two disciples. These were not part of the 11, the apostles that were with Jesus. These were two separate disciples of Jesus. We know that because one of them was named Cleopas. Okay? So we know that these were separate. The Bible doesn't say why they were going to Emmaus. There could have been a good reason why. It's possible, early church fathers say that it was possible they were going home, that they lived in Emmaus, and that's where they were going. They were heading home. We don't know for sure. We do know, like I said, that they were not part of the apostles. So they were not at communion We'll get to that in a few minutes. So, as a matter of fact, early church history says this was probably a husband and wife. So a man and woman that were disciples, but not part of the apostles. They were followers of Jesus. I think that's kind of interesting. So here they are, they're walking along and talking about what just happened, that Jesus was crucified and that he was buried, and now all of a sudden there's rumors that he's risen. They hadn't seen him yet. And this fellow comes walking up and he asks, hey, what are you talking about? And we just read that they said, well, talking about Jesus, I mean, where have you been? And not, you haven't heard about Jesus being crucified. I mean, everybody knows who Jesus was. And everybody knows that he was crucified and buried. And now these rumors that he's risen. And it says that they stopped walking. And then Jesus walked 7 miles. You ever been on a long hike? To me, 7 miles is a long hike. I don't know about you. That's a long ways to walk. You know, I'm lucky to get 2 or 3 miles in a day, all day. And I know maybe I'm not the norm, but that's a long walk. But for 7 miles, they walked and talked. And it says that he opened the scriptures to them. Well, at this point, the New Testament hadn't even begun to be written. So he's talking about the Old Testament. And for 7 miles, he's talking about all these prophecies, starting with the writings of Moses, the first 5 books of the Bible, about the Messiah that was to come, and that he was to be crucified and was to suffer and be killed, and then he would rise again. So he's explaining all this to them.